Thank you very much for that very kind welcome and for the introduction, Nitin. So yes, some of the stories will definitely come out. So you've just seen that video there. So let me just quickly check in here. Hands up, who here's got kids? Okay, most of you, that's what I thought. Keep your hands up if you think I'm utterly insane to take a 2-year-old around the world. Yeah, that's what normally happens. So what I'd like to do this morning is to take you on a journey and to tell you some stories about where this idea came from, how we made it happen, and along the way, I'd like to pull out 8 specific lessons that I've learned about leadership and team building and leave you with specific things that you can take away and action in your day-to-day lives. So as you, well, you didn't hear, but what you will hear as you go through is that I've built teams both in the world of adventure to sail twice around the world. The first time, as you saw there, on the world's toughest yacht race, and then the second time with my wife and my 3 young children, who were aged just 9, 7, and 2. But I've also built teams in business, both in large companies, and I've built up and sold a number of businesses. And actually, one of them I sold for 7 figures whilst we were sailing across the Pacific Ocean. So what I'm going to do is to pull out these lessons around leadership and building what I call a winning team. And one of the secrets for me involves defining your values. Now, when I used to work in corporate world, I always thought that values were a whole bunch of nonsense. And what I came to realize is that values are right at the heart of how you build a winning team. So I'll take you through what we did, and those values are not just for the good times, they're also for the tough times. So I'm going to share some stories about how those values literally saved the lives of me and my family. Everyone here up for a few scary stories? There we go. Okay. So we're going to go on a journey around the world, and I'm going to break it up into 8 different steps, and we're going to use my captain's log to break it up in time so we know where we are, and then I'll stop and check in with the lessons. So everyone up to ready to set sail using the theme and sail around the world? Hey, there we go. Okay. I love this. You're much more responsive than English audiences. I'm definitely going to come and speak a lot more in America. It's so much more fun. Thank you. Okay, step 1, it's all about setting a clear direction. We all know this, right? We all know we've got to have a clear direction of where we want to go. So, our idea started in 2009. Specifically, it was the 13th of June, 2009. I know this because it was my sister's 40th birthday party. And I'm there with my wife, and back then we had 2 children. And my brother-in-law told us about this family who sailed around the world, and then went on to say what a ridiculous idea that was. But that was the seed of the imagination. That was the seed of the idea that caught the imagination of both my wife and myself. It was Napoleon who said, "Imagination rules the world." And he was absolutely right, because every single thing, every single business, everything that was ever created, all started with an idea in your imagination. So we took that seed of an idea in our imagination. And this is my wife, by the way, Nicola. And we're sitting here, or she's sitting here, at our kitchen table at home. And for 6 months after that, for the rest of 2009, we talked about what do we truly want for our lives, for our family. Up until that point, I'd been utterly focused on building businesses. At this point, we said, why didn't we put family first and decide what's truly important to us and our families? And we sat down, and you can see on the screen there's a piece of paper that we started to sketch out a vision statement of what we wanted life to look like. This is the actual piece of paper here. So it took 6 months to craft this, and it had on there a date when we said we were going to set sail. The 1st of August 2014. It had a certain amount of money that we needed to create. We didn't have the money. I'll come on to that story in a moment, because lots of people assume, they say, your name's Caspar, you sound like a rich English guy, you've got floppy Grant, you look a bit like Hugh Grant, you must have loads of money. The truth was very, very different. We didn't have loads of money, but we'll come on to that. So we created this picture of how we wanted our lives to be different. And we put it on the kitchen wall, and we started to tell people what we were going to go and do. Now, back then, my family. This was my daughter, Bluebell. She was age 4 back then. And my son, Columbus. He was aged 2. I know, I couldn't have chosen a better name for someone to sail around the world. I get it. So, when my wife and I said, we're going to go and sail around the world, what do you suppose everybody did? That's right, everybody laughed. Everybody told us all the reasons why we shouldn't go and do it. And to be honest, there was some truth in some of those reasons. Because the one thing we had in our favour was this, that I had sailed around the world before, so I had some experience on the water. But there were a whole stack of reasons why not. And everyone was very kind enough to point them all out. So we didn't have the money. My business, it was a small consultancy business. We had sales of about $500,000, and we were losing money. The idea of buying a boat was completely ridiculous. My wife, Nicola, she'd been sailing twice at this point, and she'd been seasick both times. You can see it wasn't sort of in the stars at this point. And perhaps most of all, we didn't have a boat. So it's kind of an obvious thing, I know. So that's the dock there, where it would have been lovely to have a boat. But here's what we did have back in 2009. We had a committed decision. We gave ourselves 5 years. We said, this is going to happen. We had time and we had energy. And I think when you have those raw ingredients, you can make anything happen. Bringing it back to your businesses, which is what I had to do. I always ask, when you sit down with your business team, do you have a clear vision of where you want to go? Do people understand that? Do they understand why you're doing that? So the purpose is super, super important. So for us, we spent a lot of time talking about why this mattered so much to us. And we came up with a language. This was all about creating magical, life-changing experiences for us and our family. That was our reason why, because we knew on that 5-year journey, just to get to the start line, that lots of things would not go in our favor and we'd have lots of uphill struggles. And the reason why is the thing, when you've been knocked down, that's what gets you back up again. So we had a really clear vision and we had a really clear purpose. It's exactly the same things that you need in your businesses in order to be able to engage your team and to grow your business. So very simply, step 1 is spending time getting clear on the idea. What's the destination? Where is your business going? And why does it matter? I'll go on in a minute to explain how we started to apply this to my business. But just hold those concepts in your mind. What's the vision? Where are we going? And why? Why do people care? Okay, step 2. This is all, for me, what I call creating a culture of we, not me. In our timeline, we're now in a 3-year period of 2009 to 2012. And we're going to start by talking about money. So, this is my business partner, Ed. You're probably looking at that picture and wondering, why is he wearing those yellow ear defenders? The real reason is that we had quite a noisy office. We were near a busy road, so it was to keep the noise out. But actually, it was quite powerful as a metaphor, because in our business, I wasn't listening to him, he wasn't listening to me, and neither of us were really listening to the messages and what our customers were telling us. So we went through 2009, 2010, 2011, and we started changing things in the business, but nothing was materially making a difference. And the numbers weren't really moving. And we had this huge number. We said we're going to go and create £5 million, so about $7.5 million, to go and make this happen. We're there with the business turning over $500,000. There's a big gap, right? So that was where we were. It was Einstein who's often credited with this phrase, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing, but expecting a different result. And that's what I was doing for those 2 years. I thought I was doing things, but I really wasn't. I decided that with 3 years to go, that I now had to do something dramatically different inside the business. And so I started to immerse myself in learning. And I sought out the very best people that I could find. And what I ended up doing, I was coming here to America 4 times a year for conferences, because I believe some of the techniques for growing businesses are far superior here in the States than they were in the UK. So I was coming over here, and I was filling myself with all these different ideas about how can we grow a business. And this was towards the end of 2011. But I went back into the business in 2012 full of all these different ideas. And I came back into the business like a tornado. I was loaded up with ideas. And the metaphor that I have for it is that I just started charging through the business, and I was doing all these different things on my own. We got to the end of quarter 1, the end of 31st of March 2012, and my business partner, Ed, takes me to one side, and he said, "Caspar, you are being a nightmare." He said, "If you carry on doing what you're doing, every single person, including me, is going to leave the business." And I realized what was happening, that I was so focused on my goal, and I thought, I can do this on my own. I was being utterly ego-driven, and I thought I had all the answers. And I was coming in and telling everybody in the business what to go and do. And I was now on the point of breaking the business from doing this. I decided to throw myself back into learning, and I found my savior. This is her here. Her name's Margaret Meyer. And she's a leadership consultant. And she worked with me to break down what I was doing, because all the leadership techniques that I had used up until that point were very autocratic. I know the answer, you go and do this. And she told me a phrase which has stuck with me ever since. And it's this phrase here. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And the essence of that's all about building the team that can run the business. And the story that appeared in my head was, how can I create a business that can run without me? Because I knew that at some point, not very far away, I was going to be on a boat sailing around the world. So the business had to run without me. I literally had to figure out how that worked. The first thing we did, we went back to what's our purpose? Why are we here in business? And previously, I'd put this vision statement up on the wall saying, we're going to create a $100 million business. And I remember sitting around with all my team, there was only about 10 of us, and I said to them all, can anyone tell me what's the direction of the business? What are we trying to create here? And one guy turned around to me and he said, I think it's to do something to do with a number. And I realized that $100 million was very important to me, but it meant nothing to everybody else in the room. So we had to come up with a purpose for what we were doing that engaged everybody. So we spoke to everyone and said, what's the business that we want to create together that we will feel proud of, the one that we want to be part of? And this is the statement we came up with here. My business was in data analytics, and we provided data analytics as a managed service to companies like IBM, Microsoft, big banks, and so on. And we came up with this mission statement saying, our mission is to become the world's best data treasure hunters. And that was something that has caught the imagination of the people in the team. They said, yeah, I want to be the world's best data treasure hunter. I want to feel proud to have these big name clients. I want to work with clients like Apple. I want to help them find the treasure in their data. So we started to get really clear, why are we in business? What's the purpose? The second thing then was all around values. Now I mentioned earlier, when I used to work at a Big Four accounting firm, and we used to do values once a year. And I remember we would have half a day, and we'd start doing this, and I'd start looking at my watch, and I think, can I go and do something more important? Because I just thought it was a whole bunch of nonsense. But what I came to learn working with Margaret was that values are the very building block of culture and how we do things together as a team. Because values define your behaviors. Behaviors define your actions, and actions define your outcomes. They really are the fundamental block. So, I went to the team and I said, these are our values. What do you think they said? They said, no, they're not, because I still hadn't learned the lesson And we sat down together and we spent probably about 3.5 days working out what were the values that were important to us in the business. We created this picture, all of us together, to create the picture saying these are the ways that we want to act. And there were values like courage, reward, success, the lion symbolizing courage. And we put it on the office wall. Together with the purpose and the values, this was something that now really started to turn the corner of the business. And for the next 12 months, we grew faster than we had ever grown before. We made more profit in the next 12 months than we've made in the previous 6 years combined. And smiles and energy started to resonate through the business. We took everybody to Amsterdam to celebrate smashing our quarterly results. And it really was a turning point. And by the way, I should mention, on those values, we didn't just talk about them once. We created a way where they lived inside the business. And every Monday morning, I get the whole team together and we do a scrum. And I would call out 2 people who demonstrated specific instances of the values. And I would describe the behaviors that I had seen, and I would give out chocolate bars. And it was a way of just creating a conversation around it and making it fun. And then after 3 months, I got different members of the team to do it. And what it was all about was training people to spot what was right and what people were doing well inside the business. Because our natural instinct is to look for problems. How many people do you know who start a sentence by saying, the problem is? Our brains are hardwired that way. This is completely the reverse. The value structure provided a way for us to start focusing on what was right. So the business is now starting to turn the corner. I've now got to think about how would I prepare 3 small children and my wife to sail around the world. And you also know at some point with 3 small kids that someone is going to turn around and say, are we nearly there yet? You know what it's like when you're on a long car journey, right? Imagine you're now 2,000 miles out into the Pacific Ocean. Are we nearly there? What are you going to do? So what we decided was that everything that I was learning and applying in the business, we were going to apply that at home as well. So we started creating our family values. This is our kitchen. You can see on the kitchen wall, by the way, the map of the world, where we had our route plotted out. We had the vision statements. And that's Columbus and Nicola there working on our values. And we created this picture which hangs in our home today. And as you can see, the values are things like love, laugh, action, go prepared, and so on. But what was interesting is we didn't just talk about and say that's the value. We made it very specific by saying, what is it that we do when we demonstrate this value at its very best? Because remember, I've got to explain this to young kids. And unless I use simple language and simple examples, they won't get it. Pretty much the same way that you have to do in a business as well, right? So it's good practice to think, how do you explain it to kids? So pulling this together, this for me was the turning point in moving away from being an ego-driven business to building a true team who could start to take on different challenges, both growing the business and sailing around the world. So the message there for me is, do you want to go far in your business or do you want to go fast? If you want to go far, you've got to build up your team. The second piece there, we adopted this mantra in the business. It doesn't matter who is right, it only matters what is right. So we developed a process of testing and measuring different approaches. My ego had to leave the room and we had to find the way to build everybody together. Making sense? Yeah. Okay, cool. Step 3, developing a winning mindset. We're now in the stage 2012, 2014. April 2012, we had our 3rd child, Willow. And everybody at this stage said, you're not going sailing now, are you? And it's like, no, this was planned. We are going sailing. And like everybody thought we were even crazier at that point. So we now had to start getting the kids used to being on the water. So this is Willow here when she's 3 months old. We went sailing around the Greek islands, and we're doing this now regularly. So every summer we take the kids on the boats to start to get them used to the water and ingraining the habits and the procedures of how you do things on a boat. So for example, we have boat rules which we still live today. Everybody wears a life jacket all the time. I don't care whether you're a child or an adult, you're wearing a life jacket. Everybody is clipped on because the kids see what other people do. So it was ingraining those processes and those behaviors. Now, there was a huge amount of preparation to do. And we have this standing joke in my family with my wife and I, that if it was down to my wife, nothing would ever get started. If it was down to me, nothing would ever get finished. So for the last 2 years before we went away, whenever you saw Nicola, she would have this huge, great big file underneath her arm with all these different spreadsheets of all the different areas we had to cover. So thinking about how do we deal with medical situations? How do we learn how to service an engine? How do we do weather routing? How do we do potty training for a 2-year-old at sea? All these things, right? So there's endless amounts of detail because you cannot take a decision like this lightly. And we had to think about every single area. And it's interesting because when people told us all these reasons why we couldn't do this, sometimes people express opinions so loudly and so vocally that they sound like facts, but they're not. They're opinions. So whenever we heard strong voices, we would write down everything that they said. We'd let the emotions settle, and then we'd go back to it and say, is there a valid point in here? Is there something that we need to think about? Because my filter on the world is when people share things with you, they're generally looking out for your best interests. So don't ignore that stuff. Think about it. Take the emotion out of it. And that was super helpful for us because, we made sure we had a complete list of things we were going to cover. By now, lots of preparation. So we went and did sea survival training. So practice climbing in and out of life rafts should the worst happen. And we also decided to do medical training. So this is Nicola here. I'm not sure why she's looking so happy there, but she's practicing sewing up sutures. So we both trained to become ship's doctors. It's the most advanced medical training you can do in England outside of becoming a doctor or a nurse. And we thought, well, hang on a second, who should do it? And it was like, well, what happens if something happens to you? So we decided to both undertake that training to become ship's doctors. We would need those skills later on, by the way. So 2014, and we still haven't got a boat at this point. And as you can imagine, people are saying, you're not really going, are you? It's like, no, we are going. We're figuring it out. So around April 2014, what do you do when you're building multiple businesses, you're preparing to sail around the world? You go and run the London Marathon, of course. So I raised, I think it was about $8,000 for a children's charity in the UK. And what you might notice, if you look carefully at that picture, I'm a little bit wonky there. I'm not standing up quite straight. I'll come back to that in a moment. May 2014, we finally bought our boat. Her name is Aretha, and I know some of you saw her last night. So we actually sailed here from Mexico 2 days ago. So she's over in front of the Green Lighthouse, about 10 minutes away from here. And we're going to be here for a couple of days as well. So Aretha instantly became the 6th member of our family, and we only had, though, about 2.5 months to get her ready to go on a world passage, which is not a huge amount of time. So my friend Paul, who's actually on the boat as well at the moment, we started going through and putting the netting around the boat, sort of starting to think about the safety of the boat, and literally going through all the equipment and getting used to it. We took the boat down the English Channel and started testing all the systems and the procedures. Now, on that passage, Aretha performed magnificently. I, on the other hand, did not. Remember this picture here with a slightly wonky back? So, about mile 20 of the London Marathon, I should have stopped, but I didn't. And I pushed on, and I was getting physio every sort of, I don't know, half a mile or so. And we're on the middle of this sailing trip, and my back went. I literally couldn't walk. I had to get my crew to carry me back to the boat. I got referred to a surgeon, Mr. Mendoza. He did MRI scans on me, and basically said, you've got a bulging disc, L4, L5. I'm guessing you guys will have a good understanding, more than most, of what that will mean. And he said, look, this could correct itself on its own, or you can have surgery for it. He said, it's your choice. Because I said, look, I'm going off sailing around the world in 6 weeks' time. And he said, well, look, I can't make this decision. It's up to you if you want to go and do it. And what came back to me is this saying here. If there's something that you really, really want, and you have made a committed decision to go and make it happen, you will either find a way or you will find an excuse. Those are the only two options out there. And in my experience in business world, people who are good at making excuses generally do not do so well in business. You either find a way or you make a way. So, this is the view from my hospital window, 15th of July, 2014. I had 3 hours of surgery on my L4, L5. I'm delighted to say the operation was a success, and we were getting ready to get going. I did have to wait an extra 3 weeks for my back to recover. They said it takes 6 weeks to recover from an operation like that. So we're now getting ready to go onto the start line. So just pulling this together, step 3, for me, about developing the winning mindset. Every time I got stuck, the thing that got me unstuck was this habit of continuous learning. Who do I need to seek out who has been there before, knows more than me, and I can go and learn from? That was a fundamental building block. Plus also this thing I talk about relentless action. You go until you get the outcome. If you try something and it doesn't work, you try something else. If that doesn't work, you try something else. If that doesn't work, you try something else. You keep going until you get the results. And that was what we did, just to get to the start line. Okay, step 4. Who here knows about the 80-20 principle, Pareto principle? So, summing up very, very briefly, it's all about small things have a disproportionate impact. In your business, 80% of your sales will come from 20% of your customers. 80% of your profits will come from 20% of your customers. Small things have a significant impact, but it's finding what are those things that have that disproportionate impact. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a short video because we finally set sail on August the 20th, and what you will see in this video that not everything went to plan. So I'm going to play the video and then I'm going to pull the lessons out of it related to the 80-20 principle. That's my brother Max, by the way. We didn't plan on taking anybody else with us, but because of my back, we took 2 extra crew for the first part to make sure we had plenty of muscle power, and we also left our 2-year-old at home for that first 4 weeks, just to make sure we had everything covered. Start to get the sense, right? Lots of stuff have broke. When we were getting ready to leave, we asked ourselves 2 questions. 1, have we got a good, safe boat? The answer to that was yes. The second question, do we trust ourselves that we will be able to figure out the answers to whatever comes up? And the answer to that was yes. Good enough. We're going to get going. I think one of the most dangerous concepts in the world is the idea of perfect. People wait for everything to be perfect before they can get going. We have friends who are going to sail around the world with us at the same time in England. They are still there because they are waiting for everything to be perfect. And they will never leave England because they believe that everything has to be right. Our toilets could have been in better working condition. We could have done more stuff to prepare in every single area. But we focused on those two questions and we made sure that we'd be able to figure out the answer to whatever it is that came up. So where are we now? So we left the UK. We're sailing down the European coast, down to the Canary Islands. And literally, we are just at the start of the adventure. So pulling together the lessons from this, the first thing is focusing on those big things. In your business, what are the big things that make all the difference? It's so easy with our to-do lists to fill up with minutiae and things that don't make a big difference. There's a brilliant book, some of you may have heard of it, called The One Thing by Gary Keller. I highly recommend it because he asks this question in here, which is, what's the one thing that I can do such that by doing it makes everything else either easier or unnecessary? And it's all about focusing on what are those big things that make the difference rather than being caught up in the weeds. It was a really key thing that I needed to be able to do to transform the business. The second thing, trust yourself. And I think, I saw this a lot in my business, that people were uncertain, and I had to build up the belief in the team to allow them to trust themselves, to make their own decisions, to make their own mistakes, and to be able to learn from it. And finally, to be flexible and to keep adapting your approach. We weren't going to take anybody else on that round-the-world voyage with us. But because of my back, we said, we're still going. We're just going to take some extra crew for that first bit because we're not going to be reckless. We're not going to be unsafe. We're going to think about how do we manage this in a different way. Step 5, building people. A happy team is a fast team. Now, in the video right at the start, you saw the boats crashing through big waves and all those sorts of things. And that was the yacht race that I did in the year 2000. And my skipper on board that boat, her name was Alex, she had this saying that a fast team is a happy team. Because she thought if the boat was going fast, then everybody would be happy and then we'd do really, really well. And this is a picture that I have from that time. And there's not many happy people there, right? And that's me with orange hair, by the way, sitting there. And I'm trimming the mainsail. My friend Frank is steering the boat. And we're just literally fixated on the numbers. So when you're sailing a boat, you're sailing a particular wind angle, like 38 degrees, 39 degrees, 40 degrees to the wind. And we were just literally fixated on what we were doing. There was no fun. It was all about how do we make the boat go faster. And the belief that I came to is that it's exactly the other way around, that a happy team is a fast team. You get people in roles that they love doing, where they thrive, where they flourish, and then you will go fast. It's completely the other way around. Let me tell you how I came to that conclusion. So in our timeline, we're now November 2014, and we're about to do our first big ocean crossing, sailing across the Atlantic. This is our route here, literally going across from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean. And one of the things that I learned this lesson about a happy team being a fast team was around our children's education. Because we took the kids out of school for 2 years. So we had to be their school teachers and look at how do we do things together. And I remember about 3 months in, I was sitting with Columbus, and we had all these books on the saloon table about the kings and queens of England. And I set him this task to do, and I came down an hour later, and the piece of paper that he had was completely blank. And he was completely uninterested in what we were doing. So I realized that we had to take a very, very different approach to schooling. So I said, Columbus, what are you interested in? So he said, I'm really interested in fishing. So it's like, fantastic. So we got all the fishing books out, and within days, he started to devour all the information about the different fish around the world, how you catch them, what lures, and so on. And his learning rate started to go rocketing up because he was interested in that. We chucked the books over the side, only the paper bits, no plastic went over the side. And we thought, let's just focus on what everybody is super interested in. So here's Columbus here, learning how to use a sextant, how you navigate using the sun, the moon, the stars. We'd need this skill set later on, by the way. And it was because it engaged him. And when someone is engaged and they're interested, their learning rate literally goes through the roof. Here he is. We started to catch fish. So the boy who wouldn't write before, he's now writing these beautiful journals. He's weighing the fish. He's measuring the fish. He's writing descriptions of how we caught it. He's writing down the latitude and longitudes. And we then move on to dissecting the fish. So he's learning about the different parts of it. So literally, the whole thing of turning education on its head is taking us to every subject that you can imagine. He set up a business making and selling fishing lures. So he'd go around to all the other boats and sell them his lures for $5 each and advice sheets. So it was literally uncovering the different things which would inspire him. This is Willow. What does she love doing? What is it? Every sort of 2-year-old around the world, right? They love getting a bucket of Lego and tipping it out everywhere. There is nothing more painful, right, than walking on Lego in bare feet. You all done that? Yeah, me too. So what we realized is, she loved this whole environment here. So we thought, what can we do to engage her? Well, she loved making a mess. So it's like, well, do you want to tidy up as well? So she loved going around with the Hoover, and she was, doing all this sort of stuff, getting engaged. My older daughter, Bluebell, she's not the most academic of children, but she has a really big, bubbly personality. So what do we do with her? We made her our radio operator. So again, finding the things that engaged each person. The question I bring back to your business is, do you notice the strengths in your team? Do you have different people playing to the things that they do best? I remember we hired this guy called Jules, and we hired him as a frontline salesman. And for the first 3 months, he closed loads of deals. He was doing absolutely brilliantly. We then went 6 months, and he didn't close a single deal. And I was like, oh, something's not right here. We need to change something. So I said, what do you want to do? He said, I'd love to be a consultant. So we started him working with some of our bigger clients, some of the banks, and he was starting to analyze their data. But it all went wrong when he sent the data from one bank to another bank. Yeah, no, exactly. We had a sticky situation to resolve there. We did. And we realized that wasn't his role. So we then thought, well, he had something about him. He had energy, he had enthusiasm, he had purpose. And for me, those are really, really strong qualities to grab hold of. So we said, well, tell you what, let's move you across to customer care. So he would then work speaking to all of our big clients. And that role, he absolutely thrived. And he became one of the key people in the business. When we ended up selling the business, he was one of the assets that the buyer really wanted because he just engaged everybody. We could have given up on him several roles before as a frontline salesperson, but it was all about finding the things that he was brilliant at and igniting him because we knew he had that engagement and that purpose. Bring it back to the boat. So every day we would look at our navigation equipment like this, and we would see where in the ocean we were. And when we left the Canary Islands, we were one of 200 boats we're sailing across as a rally. Now, you might imagine you'll see boats every day, but after the first 24 hours, you don't see anybody because it's a huge ocean. But you get position reports every 6 hours, so you can see whether you've made a mile or lost a mile. And what was interesting is that as we started to go across and we started to get together working as a team and everybody was playing their role on the boat, so Willow cleaning up, Bluebell doing the radio, we started to really gel together. So by the time we arrived in St. Lucia, we would move from the back of the fleet to the top third of the fleet. And this is with a boat with my wife and 3 kids. So not only were we a happy boat, we were a fast boat. So for me, the lesson is a happy team is a fast team. Get people in the right roles. This was us here, coming across the Atlantic, sailing into St. Lucia, and that's us celebrating there. I have to say, it was an incredible moment from that thing sort of 5.5 years earlier, when it seemed impossible for all those reasons, and that finally we had crossed our first big ocean together. So pulling that together, step 5, the whole thing about building on your team's strengths. What does everybody love doing? Find the things where they thrive. Find the right roles for each person. And sometimes that may mean that you have gaps inside your business. Well, that's great. Then you need to find somebody who can fill those gaps. That was always my approach. Where are the gaps that I need to go and fill? Get people doing the things that they love doing best. Okay, step 6, living your values. February 2015, we're about to cross the Pacific Ocean. This is going to be our route here from the Caribbean, going through the Panama Canal, and then across to Australia. It's going to take us 6 months. The Pacific is the largest ocean in the world, you probably know, 2.5 times the size of the next largest ocean. To get into it, you come through the Panama Canal. So this is us here, a huge ship bearing down behind us. It's a little bit scary. It's like, please put the brakes on. I don't want you to come into us. And this is us coming out the other side. There's a very famous bridge in the sailing world. It's called the Bridge of Americas. And what's interesting, by the way, that vision statement that I mentioned earlier, every single morning for the 5 years while we were preparing, I would come downstairs at 5:30 in the morning, and I would do this exercise. It's called the theatre in your mind. And I would spend 5 minutes imagining what we were going to be going and doing and all the different staging posts around the world. And this was a big moment for me that I played out in my imagination every day for 5 years of seeing us sailing under that bridge there. It was an incredible moment. That thing you create in your imagination finally coming to life. By now, the kids are getting pretty good. So Columbus is happy sort of taking a watch, steering the boat. Willow loves sort of shouting out land ho. We're approaching all these Pacific islands. She's first on deck. Where is it? Where's the island? Anyone know what this is? This is the crossing the equator. So King Neptune's ceremony. So you have a lot of fun on it, and everyone has tried for certain crimes. So I think I had crimes for stinky feet or something like that. I don't know what that says. But then we start to experience the magic of the Pacific, so swimming with turtles. This is Columbus here, hanging off the back of a 4.5-meter nurse shark. So just starting to experience all these things. Now, this is a special day here. We're in Bloody Mary's restaurant. The date is the 1st of May, 2015. It's relevant because, one, it's our wedding anniversary, but secondly, it's the date that we actually sold my business. So I mentioned before that we had put the culture in place. We had the really clear vision where we were going. We had the mission, why it mattered. We had the values. We were building on people's strengths. And because we had got all those components in place, and I'd taken my ego out of it, I had literally created a business that could run without me, which I think should be the goal for any entrepreneur. How do you create that business that can run without you? If you want to take a role, that's fine. You can go and take a role, but create it so that it can run without you. So as we were sailing across the Atlantic Ocean, we had 2 large corporates came and offered to buy the business, and we selected a preferred bidder in the Caribbean. And as we sailed across the Pacific, I was literally probably had the most expensive phone calls of my life, because we had 2 sets of lawyers, we had the accountants, and we were negotiating the sale and purchase agreements. And I remember one particular night that I was on the call with everybody, and I suddenly heard this huge noise up on deck. I looked up, and the mainsail is like flying around in the wind up here. And it's like, guys, I've got to go. Phone goes straight down. Because on a boat, when stuff goes wrong, you have to deal with that immediately. But anyway, the long story short is that we finally sold the business. And I think that it was only possible because of those fundamental building blocks, the culture, the values, the mission, the purpose, building on strengths. That was the only way we managed that. Now, you know that in 2 years sailing around the world, at some point, things are going to go wrong. You just don't know what they are. This picture here is the only picture I've got from this particular time, because back then I wasn't thinking what would make a great photo if I ever became a keynote speaker. It was, how are we going to stay alive? So let me describe the situation. We're 500 miles from the nearest piece of land, deep in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And we had complete power failure on the boat. Now, what does power failure on a boat mean? Actually, anyone here seen the film Apollo 13? Remember that film? Okay, it was like that. Apart from the fact that we didn't have 3 astronauts and another 50 astronauts back down at mission control figuring the stuff out, it was me, Nicola, and our 3 kids. We're out there in the middle of nowhere. And with no power, that means no navigation equipment to know where you are. No autopilot, which is the piece of equipment that steers the boat. No lights, no toilets, no winches, no stove, nothing. We're out there. We're in one of the most isolated parts of the world. Not only that, but when everything goes wrong, it goes wrong together, doesn't it? So we had 30, 40-foot waves, we had howling gale, and we have to figure out how we're going to deal with this as a family. What would you do in that situation? You're out there with your family in the middle of nowhere. What would you do? Here's what we did. Remember our values? These things are not just for the easy times. These are for the tough times. Every single day on the boat, we did values prizes over breakfast. And I would give out stickers to the kids, and I would talk about them living the values of love, laughter, happiness. And what we were doing was we were building muscle. We were training each other to focus on what was right rather than what was wrong. So what was the natural instinctive reaction when we're there in the middle of nowhere? Well, one of the values was the word laugh. So we decided to find the humor in the situation. We told the kids we haven't got working toilets. So we introduced them to the new toilet, the bucket. And within minutes, the kids were howling with laughter as they lined up on deck to go to the toilet in the bucket and chuck it over the side. In sailing circles, it's called the bucket and chuck it system. So at that point, we couldn't get the kids to take anything seriously anymore, but it kind of settled the situation. And literally over the next 4 days, we didn't just survive, we thrived together as a team. We hand steered the boat. My wife would steer for 30 minutes, I would steer for 30 minutes. The kids would bring us up food and water on deck. There was laughter, there was love, there was compassion, there was understanding. I'm convinced if I was back in my corporate days, what would have happened? Someone had said, "It's your fault. Why didn't you do this?" And it would have turned to blame. There was not one bit of that, because we had trained ourselves to focus on what is right rather than what was wrong. So over those 4 days, we're literally steering the boat by the sun, the moon, and the stars. And we got to the next island, to the island of Niue, and we lived our values, and we worked together as a team. It became one of our proudest moments, working together as a family. I've always taught my kids this very simple formula. Some of you may have heard of this before. E plus R equals O, where E is the event, something that happens to you. R is your reaction. What do you do as a result of that? And O is the outcome. What happens? The event could be that you lose a key client, you lose a key employee, you have a cash flow crisis in the business, regulations change, you have power failure in the middle of the ocean. It doesn't really matter what it is. The only thing that matters is how you react and how you show up in that situation, and that's 100% under your control. The question I ask to all of you, are your teams equipped to thrive in times of adversity? Because things are going to go wrong at some points. You just don't know what they are. So it's all about your reaction and how do you respond in those moments. So very quickly, pulling this together, living your values. What are your values? How do you ingrain those together in your team? Remember that things will go wrong, but the answer to everything is all about managing your reaction to whatever it is that comes up. Okay, step 7, get resourceful. We're now September 2015, and we're about to sail across the Indian Ocean, which is over the top of Australia and all the way over to South Africa. Now, along the way, more magical experiences. Wherever we went, I would go and seek out local schools and go and get my kids to go along for the day. This is in Indonesia, and they have the school under the tamarind tree. So they meet there for 3 hours a week, that's it. And we got the kids to come along, and they were sharing stories, and they gave us some beautiful shells, and we left them books and tennis balls and things like that. So, it's great for the kids to see different cultures and experience that. And by the way, everybody always asks me, where is the most beautiful island in the world? Officially, it's here. It's called Cocos Keeling. It's in the middle of the Indian Ocean. I'd never heard of it before, and for me, it makes the Caribbean look like the River Thames in London. It's that beautiful and clean. So if you want a holiday recommendation, it's quite hard to get to, but it's beautiful. So one of the things that we did as part of our safety routines is that we are regularly checking our rigging. So Nicola, my wife, was our rigger because when we started, I used the excuse of my back, I can't go up the mast, so she had to go up. So we're about to have our next challenge. And we're at this point here, so about 800 miles from South Africa. And we start to have a problem with our rigging. So we have the rigging wires which hold the mast up. And the particular one here with the red rope around it is called a D1, a diagonal being the first level going up to the mast. And there are 19 strands of wire tightly woven into that. And we had this situation that one strand broke on this. And one strand on its own is not the end of the world. So we put these repairs onto the D1 and we carried on. 24 hours later, we checked it again, and we now had 3 strands that were broken. One more strand had broken, the mast would have fallen down, and we would have a different set of issues to deal with. The question, what would you do in that situation? And, I think that a boat is very much like a business. It's all about the resources that you have and how resourceful you are with them. I remember in my business, we had our lead sales guy had about 80% of the sales pipeline with him for 1 month. And he had a personal tragedy that literally took him out of the business. And we suddenly had a cash flow crisis. And in a very short space of time, we had to generate extra cash and fast. So what's interesting is when you get put in moments like that, you suddenly find hidden assets that you hadn't spotted for a while, and you get resourceful. Exactly the same thing here on the boat, that we started to find ways to lash down the mast, and we got different lines going up to it. It's not the resources you have, it's how resourceful you are. One of the other resources we had, which was quite helpful, is that we had some friends who were 50 miles away, and they had a particular piece of equipment that we didn't have, so we called them up on the VHF radio, and they came and did a mid-ocean transfer. Tiny piece of equipment. I've got lots of these on the boat now, should the worst happen. And by the way, you might say, well, why didn't you have them on your boat to start with? If you carried every single spare piece of equipment, there wouldn't be enough room for you on the boat, so you literally can't carry everything. We repaired it, we carried on, and this was us arriving in South Africa. My mum was a little bit worried about us. She flew out to make sure we'd come in safely. But the point being that it's not the resources you have, it's how resourceful you are. And also remembering that it's okay to ask for help, because other people will be around and they will be able to see things that you can't see, and a small tweak from them could fix everything for you. Every time I got stuck in my businesses, I asked for help. I went and found people who were better than I was, who had done more than I had, and I just went and I was just humble, and I said, I love what you're doing, can I learn from you? It's one of the most powerful things in the world, right? Okay, step 8, celebrate. January 2016, we're back in the Atlantic, and our route here from South Africa all the way back up to the Caribbean. And this is us crossing our finishing line in Grenada. So we've now been away for 2 years. And I have to say, that was another incredible moment. Again, that thing that seemed impossible, we had finally circumnavigated as a family team. We had done everything that we said we were going to go and do together. But here's the interesting thing around this. Yes, celebrate the big things. But the only reason you get the chance to celebrate the big things is because you celebrate the little things first. You create that winning mentality, that attitude of how do you do things together. Every time we did a sailing passage, we would have little awards ceremonies at the end of it, and we'd make it fun, we'd make it playful, and we would take the time to enjoy those moments together as a team. Exactly the same thing that I did to transform my business, exactly the same thing that we did to successfully get around the world as a family team. So, very quickly, pulling all this together, my 8 steps. The first thing is all about setting a clear direction to engage the team. Creating that culture of we, not me. Remembering my mistake there of thinking I had all the answers, and it took everybody threatening to leave the business before that slapped me over the head hard enough before I finally got the message, it's not about me, it's about we. How do we build the team and the culture to go and do those things? The whole thing about developing the winning mindset, the continuous learning, and you go with that relentless action until you get the outcome that you want. Step 4, focus on the things that have the biggest impact. Don't get lost in the weeds. Find those 1 or 2 things that make all the difference and focus on those. Building people. A happy team is a fast team. Build on people's strengths. Get them in the right role. Number 6, the importance of your values. Those things are not just for the good times, they're for the tough times. That's about ingraining those patterns. The mindset around getting resourceful, it's not the resources you have, it's how resourceful you are. And finally, the power of celebration. So that's what I'm going to wrap up with. So thank you very much for your engagement and your applause. So thank you very much.